The sky over Detroit, Michigan was a heavy gray, the last traces of sunset fading over the city's old industrial streets. A sleek black Porsche coughed and sputtered, rolling to a stop in front of a small weathered auto shop. The faded sign above read Frank's Auto since 1972. Inside, under flickering fluorescent lights, Frank Sullivan, a man in his early 70s, wiped grease from his calloused hands with a tattered rag. His fingers, though worn, moved with the precision of a craftsman who'd spent a lifetime taming machines. Frank's shop wasn't fancy, no digital diagnostics, no shiny tools, but it had survived decades because people trusted him. In a neighborhood of shuttered factories and struggling families, trust was everything. But trust didn't cover hospital bills. Frank winced, pressing a hand to his chest as a familiar ache flared. Lately, the pain came more often sharp and stubborn, like his heart was trying to tell him something. "Just tired," he muttered, shaking it off. He couldn't afford to be sick. The shop was his life, his purpose, and he ran it alone. As he prepared to lock up for the night, the Porsche's dying engine cut through the quiet, pulling him back to the present. Frank squinted through the grimy window. The car was out of place, too expensive, too polished for these streets. It belonged downtown where wealth still sparkled, not here among the ghosts of old steel plants. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in a simple leather jacket and jeans, he pulled off his sunglasses with a calm, almost gentle air. There was something about him confident but not arrogant, like he carried a quiet strength. "Evening," the man said, his voice low and warm. "Think you can take a look at this?" Frank sized him up, then glanced at the Porsche. Something about the guy felt familiar, but Frank brushed it off. Probably just another rich type with a fancy toy. "Car like that breaks down," he grumbled, not unkindly. The man smiled faintly. "A car's still a car, right?" Frank snorted, the corner of his mouth twitching. "An engine's an engine." Without another word, he grabbed his toolbox and popped the hood. He had no idea the man before him was Jonathan Roumie, the actor known for playing Jesus in The Chosen, a figure millions admired for his faith and compassion. To Frank, he was just a stranger with a busted ride. Under the shop's dim lights, Frank leaned over the engine, his hands moving with practiced ease, like they knew the machine better than he knew himself. Jonathan stood nearby, watching with genuine curiosity. "You work alone?" he asked, his tone free of judgment, just wanting to understand. "Always have," Frank replied, his voice gruff but not cold. "These days, folks don't fix things. They swap parts, charge a fortune, and call it a day." Jonathan nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "I admire people who do it right. Not many left." Frank grunted, not one for compliments. But as he tightened a bolt, a sharp pain stabbed through his chest. He froze his breath, catching fingers gripping the wrench. It passed in seconds, but Jonathan noticed. "You okay?" he asked, stepping closer. "Fine," Frank snapped, masking the moment of weakness. He dove back into the engine as if the work could bury the pain. But Jonathan kept watching, his gaze steady. There was something about this old mechanic, his solitude, his stubborn dedication, that stuck with him. As Frank tinkered, Jonathan took in the shop's details: a faded family photo taped to the wall, a small wooden cross hanging by the workbench, a worn Bible on a shelf. He didn't comment, but the sight stirred something in him. As a devout Catholic, Jonathan often prayed in quiet moments, seeking guidance. Now, seeing that cross, he felt a connection to the stranger. Silently, he whispered a prayer: "Lord, touch this man's heart." Another wave of pain hit Frank, stronger this time. He paused, pressing his chest, breathing heavily. Jonathan moved closer, concern in his voice. "Need to sit? I can call someone." "Don't," Frank growled, though his eyes betrayed exhaustion. He forced himself back to work as if the engine was the only thing keeping him upright. Jonathan didn't push, but he stayed close, ready to catch him if he faltered. He didn't know why, but he felt he couldn't leave, not yet. When Frank finally stepped back, he wiped his brow. "Done. Start it up." Jonathan slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life, smooth and strong. He grinned, running his hands over the wheel. "Beautiful." He stepped out, reaching for his wallet. "What do I owe you?" Frank waved him off. "Nothing. Seeing it runs enough." Jonathan paused, surprised. "You sure?" "Sure. Small job. Come back if it acts up." Frank said, his tone blunt but honest. Jonathan smiled, his eyes warm. "I'll be back." "And I'll bring coffee." Frank smirked. None of that overpriced nonsense. Jonathan laughed, climbing into the Porsche. He rolled down the window, giving Frank a nod. "See you, Mr. Sullivan." Frank just nodded, watching the car disappear into the night. He had no idea who he'd helped, no clue that this man would change his life. As he locked the shop, another pain gripped his chest fiercer than before. He clutched the door frame, gasping, waiting for it to pass. It did barely. He flicked off the lights and stepped into the dark, unaware that tomorrow would bring something new. Meanwhile, Jonathan drove through Detroit's chilly streets, his mind not on the road but on Frank Sullivan. The old mechanic with his trembling hands and unyielding spirit reminded him of his own struggles, nights when his bank account was empty, when he nearly quit acting. He remembered praying through despair, begging God for a sign. Now he felt Frank was no accident in his path. Something bigger was at work. Back at his hotel, Jonathan sat down and opened his laptop. He typed Frank's Auto Detroit. A basic website popped up, no frills, just a tagline. Frank's Auto, honest work since 1972. He scrolled through comments from locals. "Frank fixed my car for free when I was broke. He stayed late to get my truck running for my night shift." Jonathan's jaw tightened. Frank wasn't just a mechanic, he was a cornerstone of this community, a quiet hero. Then his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He frowned, answering. "Hello?" A hesitant voice spoke. Is this Jonathan Roumie?" "I'm Carl. I run the laundromat across from Frank's shop." Jonathan sat up, heart racing. "How'd you get my number?" Carl sighed. "I saw you at Frank's tonight, and I figured you're the only one who might help." "Help with what?" Jonathan asked, his voice tense. "Frank's in the hospital." Carl said, his tone heavy, "And this time I don't know if he's coming back." Jonathan felt a chill. He'd planned to visit Frank's shop tomorrow. Now tomorrow might be too late. Grabbing his keys, he stood. Something was calling him, a purpose, a debt. Frank Sullivan wasn't just another story, and Jonathan wasn't going to let him fade away. Jonathan Roumie's boots echoed on the pavement as he hurried to his car, the cold Detroit night wrapping around him like a warning. The words from Carl, the laundromat owner, rang in his ears. "Frank's in the hospital. I don't know if he's coming back." His grip tightened on the keys. He'd only met Frank Sullivan hours ago, but the old mechanic's quiet strength had left a mark. Jonathan felt it deep in his gut, a pull like God was nudging him toward something bigger. He slid into the Porsche, the engine humming to life, and sped toward County General Hospital. The streets were nearly empty, but his mind raced. Frank wasn't just a stranger. He was a man who'd given everything to his community, and now he was fighting for his life alone. At the hospital, the antiseptic smell hit Jonathan as he stepped through the sliding doors. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows. At the front desk, a tired nurse glanced up, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of him. She recognized him. Most people did, but to her credit, she didn't ask for a photo. "I'm looking for Frank Sullivan." Jonathan said, his voice steady. "Admitted a few days ago." The nurse typed, then nodded. "Room 312, third floor. He's stable, but he's not one for visitors. Don't expect much chatter." Jonathan thanked her and headed for the elevator. Stable. The word offered a sliver of hope, but the nurse's tone told him there was more to the story. As the elevator hummed upward, he closed his eyes for a moment, whispering a prayer. "Lord, give me the words. Let me help him." Faith had carried Jonathan through his own dark times, empty bank accounts, auditions that led nowhere, moments when he'd nearly walked away from acting. Now, standing in the sterile hospital, he felt that same faith stirring, urging him to act. Room 312 was dim, the only light coming from a monitor beeping softly beside Frank's bed. The old mechanic lay there, pale and frail, an IV line snaking from his arm. His chest rose and fell unevenly, and for a moment Jonathan just stood in the doorway watching. This wasn't the gruff, stubborn man who'd fixed his car hours ago. This was someone fighting a battle no wrench could win. Then Frank's eyes fluttered open sharp despite his condition. "Don't tell me that fancy car broke again," he rasped, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Jonathan grinned, pulling up a chair. Even now, Frank was still Frank. "Nah, she's purring like a kitten. I came to check on you." Frank snorted, then winced, a hand drifting to his chest. "Waste of a trip." "I'm fine." Jonathan leaned forward, studying him. "You don't look fine." "What's going on?" Frank's gaze flicked to the ceiling, avoiding the question. After a long pause, he muttered, "Heart's acting up. Docs say it's been bad for a while. Can't fix it like an engine, though." His voice was flat, but Jonathan caught the weight behind it. This wasn't just a medical issue. It was a man staring down his own limits. "How bad?" Jonathan pressed his tone gentle but firm. Frank shrugged the motion sluggish. "Bad enough. They're talking surgery bills I can't pay. But I'll figure it out. Always do." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He knew that tone pried stubbornness, the kind that kept Frank going, but could also break him. "Let me help," he said. "I can cover the bills." Frank's eyes snapped to him, suddenly sharp. "I know who you are, kid. Big shot actor, playing Jesus on TV. You think I need charity?" Jonathan didn't flinch. "It's not charity, it's what's right." Frank shook his head, his voice hard. "I don't take handouts. Never have, never will." Jonathan exhaled, leaning back. He saw himself in Frank's defiance years ago, when he'd been too proud to ask for help even when he was scraping by on odd jobs. But he also knew pride could blind a man. He changed tack. "Your shop, Frank. What happens to it if you're stuck here?" Frank's expression faltered just for a second. "It'll wait." "Always has." "Will it?" Jonathan asked, his voice soft but piercing. "You've built something special. You really want it to just fade." Frank didn't answer, but the silence spoke volumes. Jonathan could see it, the weight of a lifetime's work, the fear of being forgotten. He was about to say more when a knock at the door interrupted. A man in his 50s dressed in a slick suit stepped in. His smile was too polished, his eyes too calculating. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, ignoring Jonathan. "Good to see you're still with us." Frank's face hardened. "Victor Malone." "What do you want?" Jonathan's instincts prickled. Victor's presence felt wrong, like a snake slithering into a quiet room. The man glanced at Jonathan, clearly recognizing him, but his focus stayed on Frank. "Just checking in," Victor said, his tone syrupy. "Heard you were under the weather. Thought I'd remind you my offer still stands?" Frank's hands clenched the bedsheet. "I told you before, I'm not selling." Victor chuckled, unfazed. "Come on, Frank. Your shop's barely hanging on. Let me take it off your hands. You can retire, rest easy." Jonathan stood, his voice low. He said no. Victor's eyes flicked to him, sizing him up. "Jonathan Roumie, right, big fan. But this is business. Frank knows my chain could put that old lot to better use." Frank coughed, his voice weak but fierce. "Get out." Victor raised his hand, smirking. All right. Think it over, Frank. You don't have forever." With a final glance at Jonathan, he left his footsteps echoing down the hall. Jonathan turned to Frank. Who was that? Frank's face was tight with anger. "Owns a chain of garages. Been after my shop for years. Wants to tear it down, build some shiny new place. Thinks he can wait me out." Jonathan's blood ran hot. He'd met men like Victor before, vultures who preyed on the vulnerable. But he pushed the thought aside, focusing on Frank. "Why is the shop so important to you?" Frank looked away, his voice quieter. "It's all I got. Built it with my hands. People come to me because they trust me. If it's gone..." He trailed off, the words too heavy to finish. Jonathan nodded, understanding more than Frank realized. He thought of his own journey nights when he'd knelt in prayer, doubting his path, only to find strength in serving others. Frank's shop wasn't just a business. It was a legacy. An idea sparked in Jonathan's mind, but before he could speak, a nurse entered to check Frank's vitals. Jonathan stepped into the hall, needing air. Outside Frank's room, he leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. "Lord, show me the way." He thought of the cross in Frank's shop, the worn Bible. Frank might not talk about faith, but it was there, woven into his life. Jonathan felt a fire growing inside him, not just to help Frank, but to protect what he stood for. He pulled out his phone and searched for Frank's Auto Detroit. The same simple website appeared, along with more comments from locals. "Frank fixed my car so I could get to my kid's graduation. He never turned me away, even when I couldn't pay." Jonathan's resolve hardened. Frank wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for a community. But Victor Malone's words lingered like a dark cloud. That man wouldn't stop, not while Frank was weak. Jonathan slipped back into the room where Frank was alone again, staring out the window. "I'm not giving up on you," Jonathan said, his voice firm. "Or your shop. Frank grunted, skeptical. You don't even know me. I know enough, Jonathan replied, and I'm not walking away. Frank didn't respond, but his eyes softened just a fraction. Jonathan sat back down, the weight of the moment settling over him. He didn't have a plan yet, but he had something stronger faith and a growing sense that this fight was about more than one man's shop. Outside, the city hummed, unaware of the storm brewing. Victor Malone was circling, and Jonathan knew he'd have to move fast. Because some things some people were worth fighting for, and Frank Sullivan was one of them. Jonathan Roumie stood outside Frank Sullivan's hospital room, the fluorescent lights of County General casting long shadows down the hall. The encounter with Victor Malone, the slick businessman eyeing Frank's shop, lingered like a bad taste. Jonathan's hands clenched at his sides. He'd seen men like Victor before, opportunists who saw dollar signs where others saw history. Frank's shop wasn't just a building, it was a lifeline for a struggling Detroit neighborhood. And Jonathan wasn't about to let it fall. He whispered a quick prayer, "Lord, give me strength to do this right." Faith had guided him through his own trials, years of scraping, by doubting his calling as an actor. Now it was guiding him to Frank. Back in the room, Frank lay propped up, his face pale but his eyes sharp. "You're still here," he grunted, half annoyed, half curious. "Don't you have a movie to shoot or something?" Jonathan pulled up a chair, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Not today. I'm where I need to be." Frank snorted, but there was less bite in it. "You're stubborn, I'll give you that. Takes one to know one." Jonathan shot back, earning a reluctant smirk from Frank. But the moment passed and Jonathan's tone grew serious. "I meant what I said, Frank. Your shop, it's worth saving. Not just for you, but for everyone who's walked through those doors." Frank's gaze drifted to the window where Detroit's skyline loomed under a gray dawn. "It's just a shop," he muttered, but the words lacked conviction. Jonathan leaned forward. "It's more than that. You know it. I saw the comments online, people saying you fixed their cars for free, stayed late so they could get to work. That's not just a shop. That's a legacy." Frank's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Jonathan could see the weight of it settling in the fear of losing what he'd built, the pride that kept him from admitting it. Before he could press further, a soft knock interrupted. A woman in her 40s, dressed in a worn coat, peeked in. Her eyes lit up when she saw Frank. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice warm but shaky. "They said you were here. I had to come." Frank's expression softened, a rare sight. "Maggie. You didn't need to do that." Maggie stepped inside, clutching a small bouquet of daisies. "You fixed my van last year when I couldn't pay. Got me to my son's school play. I never forgot that." She glanced at Jonathan, hesitant, then back at Frank. "You're going to be okay, right?" Frank waved a hand, dismissing the concern. "I'm too stubborn to quit. You know that." Maggie smiled, but her eyes were wet. She set the flowers on the table and left, promising to return. Jonathan watched her go, his mind racing. Maggie was proof of what he'd suspected. Frank's shop was a cornerstone, a place where people found not just repairs, but hope. He turned to Frank. "How many Maggies are out there?" "People you've helped," Frank shrugged, uncomfortable. "I don't keep count, but they do," Jonathan said. "And they'll fight for you if you let them." Frank didn't respond, but the seed was planted. Jonathan stepped out to grab coffee, needing a moment to think. In the hospital cafeteria, he sat alone, staring at the steam rising from his cup. He thought of his own journey nights when he'd prayed in desperation, feeling unworthy of the role of Jesus in The Chosen. The weight of that role still pressed on him, the expectations of millions watching his every move. Yet here with Frank, he felt grounded. This wasn't about fame, it was about doing what was right. He bowed his head, whispering, "Lord, let me be your hands." His phone buzzed, snapping him back. It was Carl, the laundromat owner. "Jonathan, you got a minute?" Carl's voice was tense. "It's about Frank's shop." Jonathan's stomach tightened. "What's going on? Victor Malone's been sniffing around," Carl said. "I saw him at the shop this morning talking to some guy in a suit. Looked like a surveyor. Word is Victor's planning to bulldoze the place for a strip mall. He's saying Frank's done that the shop's as good as his." Jonathan's blood ran cold. Victor wasn't just waiting for Frank to cave. He was moving in while Frank was down. "He can't do that," Jonathan said, his voice low. "Frank hasn't sold." "Not yet," Carl replied. But Victor's got money connections. He's betting Frank won't make it out of that hospital bed. Jonathan hung up his jaw set. He needed to know more about Victor Malone. Back in his hotel room, he opened his laptop and dug into the man's history. Victor owned a chain of modern auto shops across Michigan, all gleaming and impersonal, the kind that charged triple for half the work. Forum posts painted a darker picture, complaints of shady practices, employees pressured to upsell small shops driven out of business. One post mentioned Frank's shop specifically. Victor tried to buy Sullivan out years ago. When Frank said no, Victor spread rumors his work was shoddy. Didn't stick, nobody believed it. Jonathan's fist clenched. Victor wasn't just a businessman, he was a predator, and Frank was his latest target. But something else caught Jonathan's eye. A photo of Frank's shop from a local news article showing a group of kids learning basic repairs under Frank's gruff guidance. The caption read, "Sullivan teaches the next generation to fix things right." An idea sparked. What if Frank's shop didn't just survive, but grew, became a place to train young mechanics to pass on his skills? It wouldn't just save the shop, it would cement Frank's legacy. He returned to the hospital, determination burning in his chest. Frank was awake, picking at a tray of bland food. "You look like you're plotting something," Frank said, eyeing him. Jonathan didn't deny it. "I've got an idea. Your shop, it could be more than it is. A place to teach kids, pass on what you know. Keep your way of doing things alive." Frank's brow furrowed. "A school?" "You've been drinking," Jonathan chuckled. "Hear me out. You've spent your life fixing things right. Why not teach others to do the same? Let the shop live on, even if he stopped not wanting to say the rest." Frank's face darkened. "Even if I don't?" He looked away, his voice quieter. "I don't know, kid. Sounds like a lot of fuss, and I don't trust anyone to run it right." Jonathan nodded, respecting the resistance. Frank wasn't ready, not yet, but the seed was planted. As they talked, a young man in a janitor's uniform lingered near the door, hesitating. Jonathan caught his eye and waved him in. The man, barely 20, shuffled forward, nervous. "Mr. Sullivan, I just wanted to say, you fixed my mom's car last year. Didn't charge her. It meant a lot." Frank grunted, clearly uncomfortable. "Just doing my job." The young man shook his head. "It was more than that. I want to learn to fix cars like you. If you ever take apprentices—" He trailed off, embarrassed. Frank didn't respond, but Jonathan saw a flicker in his eyes, pride, maybe hope. After the young man left, Jonathan leaned in. "See, people want what you have to give." Frank didn't reply, but the silence felt different, heavier. Jonathan stepped into the hall, his mind racing. He needed to rally the community to show Frank he wasn't alone. But as he reached the elevator, his phone buzzed again. Carl's name flashed on the screen. "Jonathan, Carl," said, his voice urgent. "Victor's moving faster than I thought. He's got a crew at the shop right now measuring the lot. They're saying it's already sold." Jonathan's heart sank. Victor was playing dirty, spreading lies to scare people off. He gripped the phone. "It's not sold. Frank's still here." "Not for long if Victor gets his way," Carl warned. "He's telling everyone Frank's giving up. Some folks are starting to believe it." Jonathan's resolve hardened. Victor wasn't just after the shop, he was trying to erase Frank's name. But Jonathan had faced doubts before in himself and others. He'd learned to listen, to show up, to let faith guide him. Now he'd do the same for Frank. He headed for the hospital exit, the city's cold air hitting his face. This wasn't just about saving a shop anymore. It was about fighting a lie, and Jonathan wasn't backing down. Victor Malone might have money, but Jonathan had something stronger, a community, a purpose, and a fire that wouldn't go out. Jonathan Roumie stood at the hospital exit, the cold Detroit air, biting his face as Carl's warning echoed in his mind. Victor's telling everyone Frank's giving up. The lie was spreading, sowing doubt in a community that had trusted Frank Sullivan for decades. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Victor Malone wasn't just after Frank's shop, he was trying to erase the man's legacy. But Jonathan had faced skepticism before, in his own career and faith. He'd learned that truth backed by action could outshine any lie. He slipped into his car, the Porsche's engine a low growl, and drove toward Frank's shop. This fight was far from over. The shop looked smaller in the morning light, its faded sign Frank's Auto. Since 1972, a quiet defiance against the city's decay. But the sight of two men in suits measuring the lot sent a chill down Jonathan's spine. One held a clipboard, jotting notes while the other snapped photos. Victor's crew. Jonathan parked and approached, his voice calm but firm. "What's going on here?" The man with the clipboard glanced up unimpressed. "Surveying the property. New developments coming. You got business here." "This is Frank Sullivan's shop," Jonathan said, his eyes narrowing. "And it's not for sale," the man smirked. "Talk to Malone. He says it's a done deal." They packed up and left, but their presence lingered like a threat. Jonathan stood alone staring at the shop. He could almost see Frank inside, hunched over an engine, grumbling about modern cars. That image fueled him. He pulled out his phone and called Carl. "We need to move fast," he said. "I want to turn Frank's shop into a training center for young mechanics." "Can you spread the word?" Carl hesitated. "Folks love Frank, but Victor's got people scared. They're hearing the shop's already gone." "Then we show them it's not," Jonathan replied. "Start with the people Frank's helped. They'll listen." Over the next few days, Jonathan worked tirelessly. He visited the hospital daily, updating Frank, who remained skeptical but listened. "You're gonna bankrupt yourself, kid," Frank muttered once, but his tone lacked its usual edge. Jonathan just smiled. "Not about money, Frank. It's about what you've built." Between visits, Jonathan met with locals, people like Maggie, the woman who'd brought flowers, and the young janitor who wanted to learn from Frank. He knocked on doors, sat in diners, listened to stories of Frank's kindness, a single mom whose car Frank fixed for free, a retiree who drove across town because Frank was the only one he trusted. Each story strengthened Jonathan's resolve. He also reached out to a few industry contacts, set designers, producers, even a sound tech who owed him a favor. They agreed to help renovate the shop, no questions asked. But Victor's shadow loomed. Rumors spread like wildfire. Frank's selling out. The shop's done. Sullivan's too sick to fight. Some locals started to waver, unsure who to believe. Jonathan felt the pressure, the same weight he'd carried when fans expected him to embody the perfection of Jesus in The Chosen. Late one night, alone in his hotel room, he knelt by the bed, his head bowed. "Lord, I'm not enough for this. Help me carry it." He thought of Frank's small cross, the worn Bible in the shop. Faith wasn't about being flawless. It was about showing up even when the odds were grim. He rose renewed, ready to keep going. By the end of the week, the community began to rally. Maggie organized a meeting at her church where dozens showed up, old customers, curious teens, even a retired mechanic who'd worked with Frank years ago. Jonathan stood before them, his voice steady but warm. "Frank Sullivan's shop isn't just a business. It's a place where people find help, trust a way forward. Victor Malone wants to tear it down, but we can make it something more, a place to teach the next generation, to fix things right like Frank always has." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The young janitor, whose name was Jamal, spoke up. "I'll sign up. Frank gave my mom a chance. I want to give back." Others nodded, inspired. Maggie pledged to handle logistics while the retired mechanic offered to teach. Jonathan felt a spark of hope, but it was tempered by a call from Carl that evening. "Victor's up to something," Carl said, his voice low. "He's been meeting with city officials, pushing for a zoning change to fast-track his strip mall. And he's spreading dirt saying Frank's shop was a front for shoddy work." Jonathan's blood boiled. "That's a lie." "Of course it is," Carl said. "But lies stick if you don't fight them." Jonathan returned to the hospital, finding Frank more alert but troubled. The old mechanic had heard the rumors too. "People think I'm a fraud," Frank asked, his voice rough with hurt. After all these years, Jonathan sat beside him, his presence calm but unwavering. "They don't believe it, Frank. Not the ones who know you, but Victor's trying to break you." "Don't let him." Frank's eyes met his searching. "Why do you care so much, kid?" "What's in it for you?" Jonathan paused, choosing his words. "I've been where you are, doubting myself, wondering if I'm enough. When I got the role of Jesus, I felt like a fraud some days. Still do. But I learned you don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep going, keep serving. Your shop, it's you serving. I'm not letting that go." Frank was quiet, but something shifted in his expression, a crack in his stubborn shell. "You're a strange one," he muttered, almost fond. Jonathan smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." The next day, the transformation of Frank's shop began. Volunteers poured in, painting walls, installing new lights, setting up workstations for training. A local news crew caught wind filming a segment that aired citywide community fights to save beloved auto shop. The coverage drew more support, but it also caught Victor's attention. Late that afternoon, Jonathan arrived at the shop to find a group of locals gathered, their faces grim. Carl pulled him aside. "Victor's goons were here," he said. Left a message, said, "If we keep this up, the shop won't make it to opening day." Jonathan's stomach twisted. What kind of message? Carl pointed to the shop's front door, where a brick had been thrown through the glass, leaving a jagged hole. A note was taped to it. "Back off, or this gets worse." The crowd murmured, fear creeping in. Jonathan felt the weight of their eyes on him. He thought of the moments he'd faced doubt when playing. Jesus felt too big, too heavy. He'd leaned on faith then, and he would now. He stepped forward, picking up the note, his voice steady. "Victor thinks he can scare us. He's wrong. This shop isn't just Frank's, it's ours. We're not backing down." The crowd hesitated, then nodded, their resolve hardening. Maggie clapped her hands. "Let's clean this up and keep going." Volunteers grabbed brooms and the work resumed, but Jonathan knew Victor wasn't done. That night he sat in the shop, now quiet, the new lights casting a warm glow. He traced his fingers over Frank's old workbench, where the small cross still hung. Lord, protect this place. He didn't have all the answers, but he had faith and a growing army of people who believed in Frank. As he locked up his phone, buzzed, an unknown number. He answered, cautious. "Hello." A smooth, familiar voice came through. "Mr. Roumie, it's Victor Malone. I hear you're making waves. Nice work on the news. But let's be real, this little project of yours. It's a losing bet." Jonathan's grip tightened on the phone. "Frank's shop isn't yours, Victor, and it never will be." Victor chuckled, unfazed. "We'll see. Enjoy your moment. It won't last." The line went dead, leaving Jonathan in the dark, the weight of the threat sinking in. Victor was planning something bigger, something uglier. The opening day was approaching, and Jonathan knew it wouldn't just be a celebration, it would be a battle. He glanced at the cross one last time, then stepped into the night, ready to face whatever came next. Jonathan Roumie stood outside Frank's auto, the night air of Detroit sharp against his skin. Victor Malone's voice still echoed in his mind. "Enjoy your moment. It won't last." The broken glass from the brick thrown through the shop's door glinted under the streetlights, a reminder of the fight ahead. Jonathan's hand brushed the small cross hanging inside its quiet presence, grounding him. He whispered a prayer. "Lord, let this place stand." Faith had carried him through his own battles, nights of doubt, when the weight of playing Jesus in The Chosen felt too heavy. Now it fueled his resolve to protect Frank Sullivan's legacy. The shop's opening day was tomorrow, and Jonathan knew it would be more than a celebration, it would be a showdown. By morning, the shop buzzed with life. Volunteers swarmed the lot, setting up tables, hanging banners, and testing new training equipment. The sign above now read, "Frank Sullivan Technical Garage, since 1972. Do it right." Maggie, the woman who'd brought flowers to Frank, directed traffic with a clipboard, while Jamal, the young janitor, helped teens practice on a donated engine. Local news vans parked nearby, cameras rolling. The community had shown up, old customers, curious kids, even skeptics who doubted Frank's fight. Jonathan stood back, watching, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. This was what Frank had built, not just with tools, but with trust. Frank himself arrived from the hospital against doctor's orders in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with the old fire. He took in the transformed shop, the crowd, the new sign. "You're going to give me a heart attack with all this," he grumbled to Jonathan, but a faint smile betrayed him. Jonathan crouched beside him. "Told you we'd make it happen," Frank snorted. "You're a pain in my side, kid." But his gaze lingered on the sign, and for the first time Jonathan saw something like peace in his eyes. The opening ceremony began at noon. Maggie spoke first, her voice clear. "Frank Sullivan's been fixing our cars and our lives for 50 years. This garage isn't just his, it's ours, and it's here to stay." The crowd cheered, and Jamal stepped up, shy, but determined, announcing the first class of apprentices. Frank's name rang out in applause, and Jonathan felt a lump in his throat. He thought of his own journey, nearly quitting acting, praying through empty days. Frank's story wasn't so different. They'd both kept going, and now here they were. But the joy was short-lived. As the crowd dispersed for a ribbon cutting, Carl, the laundromat owner, pulled Jonathan aside, his face tense. We got trouble," he whispered, nodding toward a group of rough-looking men lingering at the lot's edge. They wore work vests, but their smirks and huddled posture screamed hired muscle. "Victor's guys," Carl said. "I overheard him talking about cutting the power to the shop. Something about making it look like a failure today." Jonathan's blood ran cold. Victor wasn't just threatening, he was sabotaging the opening. He scanned the crowd, spotting a news crew nearby. If the power went out, the story would shift from triumph to embarrassment, fueling Victor's lies about Frank's shop being a lost cause. Jonathan's mind raced. He couldn't let this happen, not after everything. He thought of the moments he'd faced pressure on set when fans expected him to be more than human. He'd leaned on faith then, and he would now. "Keep an eye on them," Jonathan told Carl. "I need to talk to Maggie." He found her near the ribbon, briefing the mayor who'd come for the ceremony. Jonathan pulled her aside, explaining quickly. Maggie's eyes narrowed. "That snake. What do we do?" "Get the news crew ready," Jonathan said. "If Victor's men make a move, we expose them. But we need proof." Maggie nodded, rallying a few volunteers to watch the suspicious group. Jonathan returned to Frank, who'd noticed the tension. "What's going on?" Frank demanded, his voice sharp despite his frailty. Jonathan hesitated, then knelt beside him. "Victor's trying to ruin this. He sent guys to cut the power, make the shop look like a failure." Frank's face darkened, his hands gripping the wheelchair. "That bastard. I should have sold years ago, spared everyone this." "No," Jonathan said, his voice firm. "You didn't sell because this place matters, and we're not letting him win." He placed a hand on Frank's shoulder, his presence steady like the quiet strength he learned to carry. Frank met his eyes, and for a moment the old mechanic looked like he believed it. The ceremony continued, but the air crackled with suspense. Jonathan kept one eye on Victor's men, who'd moved closer to a utility box at the lot's edge. He signaled Carl, who was already whispering to a cameraman. Then it happened. One of the men pulled a pair of bolt cutters, moving toward the box. But before he could act, Jamal and two other teens stepped in, blocking his path. "What you doing, man?" Jamal asked, loud enough to draw attention. The man froze, caught off guard. The crowd turned, murmurs rising. Carl seized the moment, pointing at the group. "Those guys work for Victor Malone. They're trying to shut us down." The cameraman swung his lens, capturing the scene. Maggie pushed through, holding up her phone, live streaming to a local news page. "This is what Victor's doing to our community," she shouted. "Trying to sabotage Frank Sullivan's legacy." The hired men panicked, one dropping the bolt cutters as the crowd closed in, phones recording. But the real blow came from an unexpected source, Carl, who'd been digging into Victor's dealings. He stepped forward, holding a folder. "I got proof," he said, voice booming. "Emails from Malone to city officials bribing them to rezone this lot. He's been lying about Frank's shop being sold." The mayor, still present, took the folder, his face grim as he skimmed the pages. The crowd erupted, chanting Frank's name. Victor's men fled, but the damage was done. The news crew broadcast the confrontation live, and within hours Victor's name was plastered across headlines. "Local businessman caught in bribery scandal." His strip mall deal collapsed, investors pulled out, and lawsuits loomed as the city launched an investigation. Victor's empire crumbled, his reputation shredded, a punishment as swift as it was severe. The community's outrage had turned his own greed against him. By evening, the shop glowed under new lights. The broken glass replaced the celebration in full swing. Frank, exhausted but present, watched as teens tinkered with engines under the retired mechanic's guidance. He turned to Jonathan, his voice low. "Guess I owe you, kid." Jonathan shook his head, smiling. "You paid me back, Frank, by showing me what it means to keep going." Frank frowned. "How's that?" Jonathan gestured to the bustling shop. "This. You proved the right way's worth fighting for." He paused, his eyes soft. "And you reminded me why I do what I do." Frank looked away, but his lips twitched almost a smile. Later, as the crowd thinned, Jonathan stepped outside, gazing at the sign, "Frank Sullivan, Technical Garage." "Do it right." Frank joined him, wheelchair creaking. The old mechanic stared up, his voice quiet. Didn't think I'd see this day. Jonathan nodded, his heart full. He thought of his own prayers, the nights he'd asked God for purpose. He'd found it here in this shop, in these people. Silently, he thanked the Lord, feeling the weight of the journey lift. Frank's story wasn't over. It was just beginning, carried by a community that wouldn't forget. Inside, Jamal showed a kid how to hold a wrench, echoing Frank's gruff instructions. The garage hummed with life, a beacon in a weary city. Victor Malone was gone, his schemes buried under the truth. And Frank Sullivan's name, it would live on, etched in steel and spirit, a legacy that no one could tear down.